morning everyone. I request JAYANTH KAIKINI, Professor Rajendra Chenni, Abhilasha Hande and Vardey sir to join us on stage. We are gathered here today for a significant event organized by the Gandhian Center for Philosophical Arts and Science. I welcome all of you to A Day with JAYANTH KAIKINI and his literature. To begin this event, I request Ms. Shravya Basri, faculty, Gandhian Center for Philosophical Arts and Science, to come forward and sing the inaugural song.
Namaste. The inaugural song is our department's theme song. So it's a practice here at Gandhian Center where we sing Vaishnava Janato, a bhajan liked by Gandhiji, written by Narsimha Mehta, and the Bhavanuvada of it, written by JAYANTH KAIKINI sir. वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು ಬಾಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪರದುಃಖೇ ಉಪಕಾರ ಕರೆ ತೋಯೆ मन अभिमानना आडिरे लोभविಲ್ಲದ ಉಪಕಾರವೇ ಸುಖವು ಗರ್ವವು ಬರದಿರೆ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು सकल लोकमा सहने वंदे निंदन करे केडिरे सकल जीवदली गौरवविरली निंदे असूये अಳಿದಿರಲಿ वाचकाच मन निष्ठल राखे धन धन जननी तेड़ीरे निर्मल नಡೆ ನುಡಿ ನಿಷ್ಠಲ ನಿಲುವನು ಕಲಿಸಿದ ತಾಯಿಗೆ ಹಿತವಿರಲಿ वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जी पीड़ पराई जाने रे समदृष्टि ने तृष्णा त्यागी पर श्री जेरे माते रे समभावदली ದುರಾಸೆಯು ನೀಗಲಿ ವನಿತೆಗೆ ಅಭಯದ ನೆರಳಿರಲಿ ಜೀವಾರ್ಥಕ್ಕೆ ಅಸತ್ಯನ ಬೋಲೆ ಪರಧನವ ಜಾಲೆ ಹಾತರೆ ಸುಳ್ಳಿನ ರುಚಿಯನು ಅರಿಯದ ನಾಳೆ ಪರಧನವನ್ನು ಬೇಡನಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು ಬಾಳಲ್ಲಿ वणलोभीने कपट रहित चे काम क्रोध निवार्यारे कपटवरियदे सागुनी ಬೀಳದೆ ರಾಗ ದ್ವೇಷಗಳ ಸುಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ दर्शन करता कुळये कोटे रे तारा रे ममತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮನುಜನಾಗುವ ಪಯಣವೇ ಬಾಳಿನ ಗುರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नाणे रे ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು ಬಾಳಲ್ಲಿ ಲೋಭವಿಲ್ಲದ ಉಪಕಾರವೇ ಸುಖವು ಗರ್ವವು ಬರದಿರೆ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ವೈಷ್ಣವ ಜನ ತೋ तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराए जाने रे ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು ಬಾಳಲ್ಲಿ
Thank you, ma'am. Now I invite our esteemed director, Professor Varde Shiregange, Gandhian Center for Philosophical Arts and Science, to kindly come forward and extend a warm welcome and an introductory remark to our distinguished guests and participants.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ನನಗೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ಅಥವಾ ನಿಮಗೆ ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಜಯಂತ್ ಕಾಯ್ಕಿಣಿಯವರ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಕನ್ನಡ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರುವವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಪರಿಚಯಿಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಉದ್ದೇಶದಿಂದ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆಯುತ್ತೆ. ಅದರರ್ಥ ಕನ್ನಡವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇವೆ ಅಂತ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಕನ್ನಡ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಕನ್ನಡ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಎರಡೂ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತೇವೆ. Probably Vaishnava Janato, Gandhiji's favorite song, that was best understood in Karnataka after Jayanth Kaikini translated that into Kannada. All of us in fact have been familiar with this song for a long time, but whenever we listen to it in our own mother tongue, we will also understand it better. Gandhiji himself made a radical shift when he rather popularized this song. Or he also did make a radical shift in case of Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram, Ishwara Allah Tero Naam. He did make a radical shift. Like that, Jayanji also made a radical shift in Vaishnava Janato. Incidentally, he dropped something which could be to an extent interpreted as a religious connotation, the word Vaishnava. He dropped that word, and in his translation you won't find that word, but ಎಲ್ಲರ ನೋವನು ಬಲ್ಲವನಾದರೆ ಗೆಲ್ಲುವೆ ನೀನು ಬಾಳಲ್ಲಿ. So song also becomes ethical and universal. So when you understand the pain of others, you will really win in your life. You will succeed in your life when you actually understand others' pain. So that is the first line of Vaishnava Janata, translated into Kannada by Jayanth Kaikini. Best understood in Karnataka after he translated. And I have also told him possibly this is his best contribution to Kannada literature. I congratulate him for that. There is a long list of writings and awards which has already been shared with you incidentally, so I don't really repeat. But I should mention it is the 50th year since his first book of poetry collection Rangadondishtu Dura was published. So this is the 50th year since his first I will show you the book later. And that book actually looks older than him. He looks younger. He looks just 50 or less than that. As if he wrote it when he was born, just born. Kaikini is a name of a place near Gokarna, and his father was also a major writer, Gaurish Kaikini. Gokarna, your favorite weekend spot, but of course Gokarna has many dimensions, not just the beaches. And actually, Tehelka magazine once wrote, if you combine Varanasi and Goa, you will get Gokarna. That is his birthplace. He was brought up there. He studied in another nearby place called Kumuta initially. Then Dharwad, we can easily claim as the cultural capital of northern Karnataka. If I say Karnataka, then there will be a dispute. I would also say this is the place where sciences and arts meet. So there are also students of natural sciences and there are also students of liberal arts, philosophical arts, sciences. Jayanth also says this, of course, creativity that functions behind both sciences and arts is the same. You cannot really make a distinction. It's the same creativity that manifests both in sciences and arts. And he studied MSc Biochemistry, which some of you have been studying. But at the same time, he was also writing poems, short stories, etc. Of course, he did his biochemistry in Dharwad. And then he went to Mumbai for his work, met Smitaji, and he himself says their chemistry matched. Working in a chemical laboratory, they were working in a chemical laboratory, pharmaceutical company. Married, then of course Srijana, Rutvik, Vivek, all of them are here, joined the family. But today Jayanth has much bigger family. It is part of his persona, of course. He is a very friendly person, of course. He would talk to anyone easily. He is the first one to come forward and talk. Of course, he has written extremely sensitive poetry, short stories, translated the plays, transcreated the plays, all that he has done. But his association with films, his film lyrics also made him hugely popular. So today you can find his songs on the tongues of the younger generation in Karnataka. So in that sense, not just in Karnataka, even beyond borders, not just Karnataka, beyond borders, that is his family. That is his family. He is also a household name in Karnataka, as you know. I mentioned all these places primarily because these places, be it Gokarna, be it Dharwad, be it Kumta, be it Mumbai primarily, and then of course Bengaluru, these places also form the universe of his stories, the canvas, particularly Gokarna and Mumbai. More particularly Mumbai. He weaves his stories from the characters of this universe and builds a universe with U capital. It would be an interesting study even to study the names of his people who people his universe. So hundreds of characters, hundreds of characters. So you just need to read the names, and that itself would be a seminar paper. And of course I know Jayanth doesn't like too much of an academic approach. I hope he doesn't hate academicians, but he doesn't like too much of an academic approach to literature, because he believes that it takes literature away from people. His characters are unabashedly small fish which swim and survive. They are the small fish which swim and survive in the vast polluted ocean of Mumbai's new economy. Still, for him, Mumbai is Kayakave Kailasa. He still has certain fascination for Mumbai. Kayakave Kailasa. Mumbai represents that philosophy of work is worship. As a contrast. When he says this, of course, he says this with a sense of fascination. As a contrast, he says this, in Gokarna, it is Kailasave Kayaka. Worship itself is work. So there is a comment. There is a socio-political comment, very subtle. Very few writers have caught the absurdities, pathos, and comic turmoil that drive life in an Indian city today with vibrancy of Jayanth Kaikini. Very few writers have caught the absurdities like Jayanth Kaikini, says none less a person than Girish Karnad. As I also need to talk about Jayanth's literature later, I stop. Otherwise I would have just gone on and on. I stop here and I profusely welcome him, his family, Smitaji, Srijana, Ratnik. One of the very few most significant critics today is Professor Rajendra Channi. Someone who has studied literature as a kind of tapas as well as dhyana. Someone who has studied literature as some kind of a tapas as well as dhyana. Incidentally, he was also Jayanth's campus mate in Karnataka University, Dharwad. So that is the connection they share from the beginning. Retired as the professor of English literature in Kuvempu University, but he will never be tired. He will never retire. He will never be tired. He gets up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning and travels to distant places for this kind of a seminar. And tomorrow he will be in Bangalore once again to take part in a literary meet. Of course, he has also written several books, won several awards. Now he also heads Manasa Research Center in Shimoga. Earlier, of course, he spoke to our students on Amitav Ghosh, his book, The Great Derangement. He has also spoken to you about Vachana literature, about Basava, Allama, Akka. Truly, we are also very, very eager to listen to him. I welcome Professor Rajendra Chenni. Madam Abhilasha, Principal of the SMS Higher Secondary School in Brahmavar, is a very sensitive writer as well. She has written several plays. She's a culture enthusiast. At the same time, of course, presented papers in seminars, and she would once again be introduced before her session. A sensitive reader, a writer, Madam Abhilasha, I wholeheartedly welcome you. Dr. Siraj Ahmad, another important writer, a professor in a college in Shimoga. He was supposed to join us, but he has sent his paper, so that will be read out in the afternoon session. He is not here at the moment, a very sensitive writer. In his absence, of course, I welcome him, Dr. Siraj Ahmad. And we will also have Avinash Kamath, who has made a documentary on JAYANTH ji, which will also be partly screened in the afternoon, and Mr. Avinash Kamath will also be here to talk about the film and share his experiences of making the film. And later, we will also have singing of Jayanth Kaikini's film songs by our own Shravya Basri, who teaches music appreciation in our department. Of course, Shravya is here, Avinash is not here, Dr. Siraj is not here. In their absence and in Shravya's presence, of course, I welcome all of them. Gandhian Center for Philosophical Arts and Sciences, MAHE, studies literature and cinema as a part of our MA and BA courses in ecosophy, aesthetics, peace and art media. And I am happy to welcome all of you. Thank you.
We now move on to the inauguration session. I request dignitaries on the dais to join.
ಊರು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇ ತಡ ಹಬ್ಬಿದ್ದೇ ಹಬ್ಬಿದ್ದು ತಲೆ ತಗ್ಗಿಸಿ ಮನ ತುಂಬಿ ಚಪ್ಪರ ತಬ್ಬಿದ್ದೇ ತಬ್ಬಿದ್ದು ಪಚ್ಚಲ ತೀರ್ಥವಾದರೂ ಸರಿ ಅರಿವಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಹಿರಿ ಹಸುರಾಗಿ ತುಂಬಿ ಕಂಗೊಳಿಸಿದ್ದು ಕಂಡಷ್ಟು ಸುಖ ಪುಳಕ ಕಡಿಸಿದಷ್ಟು ಚಿಗುರು ಕಂಡಷ್ಟು ಸುಖ ಪುಳಕ ಕಡಿಸಿದಷ್ಟು ಚಿಗುರು ಜೀವ ಪುಟಿತ ಮೊಗ್ಗೆ ಗಿಣ್ಣಿನ ಸಂತೆ ತಿಂದಷ್ಟು ಹಿಂಸೆ ಇತ್ತಷ್ಟು ಚಕ್ರ ಕುಡಿಯೊಡೆತ ಅಂದುಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೇನೆ ಸೊಪ್ಪು ಮೆಲುವಾಗ ದೇಟು ಜಗಿಯುವಾಗ ನನಗ್ಯಾಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲವಿ ತೃಪ್ತ ಸುಖ ಭೋಗ ಯಥೇಚ್ಛ ಯೋಗ.
It is my privilege to introduce our inaugural speaker for today's event, Professor Rajendra Chenni. He is currently the director of Manasa Center for Cultural Studies, Shivamogga. He graduated with his BA and MA in English Literature from Karnataka College, Dharwad. He received a PhD in English Literature from the University of Mysore in 1987. He was a professor of English at Kuvempu University, Shivamogga. Professor Chenni is a successful bilingual author who writes in both Kannada and English. He wrote 12 books in Kannada and 4 in English, including the novel. Now, without further ado, I request our inaugural speaker, Professor Rajendra Chenni, to kindly come forward and address the gathering.
What Radesh was mentioning, the dislike and the distrust that Jayanth has for academic discourses. So my apologies in advance because I'm going to subject you very cruelly to a long harangue on what you have been writing for the last 50 years. I should begin by complimenting the department led by Vardesh that they have thought of organizing this interactive session, this discussion with Jayanth, who in my view is one of the most significant Indian writers in the post-independence period. I would like to underline Indian because there has been some kind of an unexplained parochialism in Kannada criticism, which takes great pride in the rootedness of the writers in their Kannada milieu. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we should also be conscious of the fact that by being rooted, Kannada writers have also found some kind of a site, I should say, from where they explore what it really means to be an Indian without subscribing to all these misleading myths about nation and nationalism. There have been, the major Kannada writers like Jayanth, they have been exploring the means of negotiating with what it means to be an Indian and what it means to be an Indian in a very complex phase where the cultural memories are being threatened by a particular kind of modernity, where the global historical phenomena seem to be looking for a very different kind of sustenance than we have believed in earlier. And it's also an attempt to understand the new self of the human beings being constructed by what now happens to be India. And to this effort, Jayanth's contribution have been immense. You have already been informed that he is an extraordinary poet who won the State Sahitya Academy for his first collection of poems when he was 19 years old. He set a new trend in Kannada poetry. He began to write when the modernist phase in Kannada was very dominant, and there was a general consensus that the previous moment of creativity known as the Kannada Renaissance and Navodaya, which had started towards the end of the 19th century, had lost its steam, and the only way to negotiate with one's genuine experiences would be to make use of the legacy of modernism. It was during this phase that Jayanth broke new ground by making the readers of poetry understand that there are alternative ways of dealing with the local and the global, the local and the national, and perhaps not by returning to the older modes of poetry, but by trying to innovate, by trying to discover a new idiom that he has been doing in his poetry, from the first one that I mentioned to the recent one that has been published. I will have something to say about his poetry. But I consider him a major writer of fiction, and most of my talk will focus on his short stories. If one were to think of a credo for Jayanth's short fiction, it would run like this. Behind every ordinary face, there are at least 100 extraordinary stories. And these are the stories which never get told, mainly because sometimes they are suppressed as being ordinary, quotidian, everyday, and therefore not qualifying for a literary representation. Sometimes they are suppressed because they are an alternative. They are a counter to what the elite and the educated and the literary class believes in. That, I think, is probably the major reason why these tales and stories are never told. But fortunately for Jayanth, when he began to write about the ordinary, the unnoticed, the one which is not trivial but trivialized, he had a legacy behind him. This is the legacy of the Kannada writers of fiction from the very beginnings of fiction in Kannada. The major choice which the Kannada writers made was to opt for the local and the regional at a time when, during the period of the Indian Renaissance, during the period of the Indian struggle for independence, there was a heavily emotionally, affectively charged way of thinking where the nation was to be made prominent. It had to be foregrounded in your fiction. If at all you write fiction, it should be about the nation in the making. It should be about the nation which we aspire for. But the major writers, and Jayanth should correct me, the very first short stories by Kamath and Kadembonlu and others, they deliberately chose characters and themes belonging to what could at that time be described as the extremely regional. And they wrote about this world in a very earthy idiom, in an idiom which had more to do with the variations of the spoken language rather than the standard literary register used in literature. I consider this move made by the Kannada writers as a move which symbolized the resistance against some of the hegemonic discourses which were there in our society and also in our intellectual world. This was a tendency to create those huge symbols, huge images, homogenized concepts of society and nation, and thereby ignoring the wonderful diversity that had been a part of our history. Now, at a time when these attempts to create very large images, homogenized images, very powerful so-called universal images were being made, Kannada writers began to focus on what was regional and what was local. What began in our short fiction, by the time we move on to the 30s, in the hands of Shivaram Karanth and Kuvempu, it emerged into a full-fledged cosmology. And once again, going back to what Vardesh was mentioning in his prefatory remarks, this is a question of not documenting the local, not falling into the prison of European realism, not getting into the prison house of European realism, though you had much to learn from some of the important English writers. This is not a question of trying to create a sociological description of what this regional society was. It wasn't. anything of this kind. It was a very innovative attempt to question these so-called universal frameworks by positing what was something very different, what was something more solid, one could say, and what was what had been there throughout Indian history. What I am trying to articulate before you is this act of writing about your known home world during that juncture of history was also an act of rebellion. It was an act of resistance, intellectual resistance, creative resistance, because you are registering your faith in a historically existing other reality. It was not a utopian dream. It was not a nostalgically constructed return to the past. It was not the silly kind of sentimental romanticizing. It was much more than that. Because in the first place, the local was marked by all the contradictions which exist in society. The main point I want to make about Jayanth's short fiction is, though they are not, his short stories are not overtly marked by political conflict, they are not overtly marked by caste distinctions, they are not there directly, dipping into all this. They are essentially about contradictions, they are essentially about conflicts, they are essentially about the humiliation, the suffering, the dehumanizing of human beings, because these structures exist, because these structures are a part of this reality also. This needs to be emphasized, because I am not trying to project Jayanth as a regional writer in that sense. What I am talking about here is an attempt had to be made to look at the darker aspects of the existing local society. Were there possibilities for enablement of human beings in this society? Were there ways out for some kind of an escape from what was so oppressive to the young people? Were there opportunities for remaking oneself, discovering the real self? These are the questions that Jayanth's stories ask about the local and the regional. So in that way, it was not just a continuation of what the great Kannada writers had already done. It was a contribution. It was adding a very significant dimension to what had been done earlier. For example, the great Masti Iyengar, to whom we use the sobriquet of father of modern Kannada short story, in his better stories, he has also written pseudo-historical, some kind of revivalist stories also about conventions and traditions, partly glorifying them. But in the best short stories, Masti Venkatesh Iyengar writes about the extraordinary things hidden behind these ordinary human beings. Since some of the students, or most of the students, are not familiar with Kannada fiction, let me quote one or two stories from Masti. There's a wonderful story, Venkatigana Hendati, the wife of Venkatiga, who is a very, very ordinary person. And his wife is tempted away, lured away from him. She goes away. It's an adulterous relationship. And as he narrates it to the storyteller, Masti, he says that I don't know why she made that choice. Maybe she wanted it, I don't know. Maybe she was right in her way, and I am not going to sit here in judgment over her. I want her to come back, and I have brought her back, he says. And Masti, without trying to, use all the verbal rhetoric, he begins the story when the storyteller and his friend are looking at the sky and they see a bird and they wonder whether it is a vulture or whether it is the eagle, the vehicle of God Vishnu. And after reading the story, you begin to suspect that Venkatiga could be not the first but the other one. He could be the vehicle of something greater, something transcendental, something that you never, suspected an ordinary person to possess. And the same is true of Kuvempu's novels. Malayalam Madhumagalu is already available in English translation, The Bride of the Hills, and now a new translation by Vanmala is soon to come out. We are breathlessly waiting for another translation. And what happens in this translation is the same. The ordinary gets elevated into something that can be called transcendental. The beauty of the world, for which a Timmy, a Dalit young woman, may not even have words, is experienced by her. And this is again to relate it to what I was saying about Jayanth. It's a feudal world, a very sadistic, male-dominated world where women of the underprivileged classes, especially Dalit women, are sexually exploited. This is a world which is now rotting in superstition, not knowing whether to choose conversion to Christianity or to continue to be the slaves of the Brahmins. That is the world. That is the world. That's the real world. That's the world of contradictions. You have to face it as a fiction writer and then tell us what the ordinary human beings do in order to deal with it. That's exactly what Jayanth also does in his short stories. That I think is his greatest contribution, because without going into details, let me mention that there were very different attitudes towards, I don't like to use the word at all, but the so-called underprivileged, the pity and the sympathy in some of the Navodaya writers towards such characters. Then the angry, dismissal and rebellion in the Bandaya Sahitya, pointing these as merely victims. Then the attempt made by a great writer like Mahadeva to convince Kannada readers that a Dalit is not always a victim, and seeing him only as a victim is the greatest unjust denial of the wonderful imagination that the whole community possesses, you see. And as one of the great inheritors of what was then being done by a writer like Mahadeva, you have Jayanth, because he also refuses to hold up these orphans and migrants to the cosmopolis, the prostitutes, the pimps who people his short stories as merely victims. They are not. In fact, it may take a lot of persuasion to make them think that they are victims, because they see Mumbai not just as a place of hard labor. I don't think Jayanth's stories tell us that it is Kayakave Kailasa. It is Kayaka, all right. We're not sure about Kailasa. It's it's a terrible word. One of the things I should point out to those who have not read Jayanth's stories is I do not find any Kannada writer for whom the entire physical world, with all its things and objects, you see, 6x6 homes within quotes in Mumbai, a flat, the filthy corner called More, where you have to do your ablutions in the morning, and the one torn mat on which hosts and relations have to spend their nights, where girls go out to fetch water and milk only to be molested by the young boys who are also waiting there. The whole world of illusions. In fact, many of his short stories describe Mumbai as populated with the posters, the Bollywood posters. They are the huge images of the world of fascinating illusions, into which the young ones are trapped, to which young boys move, to become, to quote the title of his second the second most important collection of translations, Mithun number 2. 2 volumes of short stories of Jayanth translated into English are now available. Students here should read. The translations are by one of our greatest translators, Tejaswini Niranjana. The first one came out and won the DSC award. The second one was Mithun number 2, was released very recently. Now I'm mentioning this because the unique feature of his writing is, yes, there are 2 worlds. The world of Gokarna and Kadadi, and the world where the most ubiquitous objects are the buses which take in people from those villages to Mumbai. In one short story, the entire village looks stupefied because the one bus which has to come in the night doesn't come. There's such a feeling of lostness in the entire village because the bus hasn't come. Now these buses, they do not function as bridges between the 2 worlds. They are there as escape routes for the young ones of these villages who would like to go and pursue their dreams of success, dreams of wealth and money in the Maya Nagari called Mumbai. But interestingly, the world of Gokarna or the world of Kadadi and the world of Mumbai are not 2 unrelated binaries. In a way they are related because there is a dynamics of society. Both are changing. The villages, it's not a question of again saying, like many writers had done earlier, that the past conventions are lost and then all those settled consensual values are lost. No, I don't think as a modern writer Jayanth believes in those things. It's definitely there that there's a social dynamism which is pushing the world of Gokarna and Kadadi to become an imitative Mumbai, or to push the denizens, the young citizens of this, to Mumbai. That's the way in which the 2 worlds are connected there, you see. Because you will increasingly see in his short stories that even those who become residents of the cosmopolis for some years, they are transformed by it. And even if they return, as again I think Vardesh was mentioning, that Gokarna now becomes only a place for what is today rightly known as over-tourism, excessive tourism, right? Even when they come for that, the stories make it clear that this is not a return to a world of values. This is a return, okay, a bit sentimental and emotional, to something that you have not been able to sustain, something that you have not been able to make creative use of. You see, that's the way in which the 2 worlds are presented to us. So I would say that after crossing the whole range of pity, compassion, understanding, towards the subalternized classes. It is with Jayanth that we move towards a total and a comprehensive understanding of what they are, what happens to them, what happens to their minds. See, one of the problems I think with the reception of Jayanth Kaikini, I'm not talking about the critical reception, I am talking about the absolute wonder, the power of his language. It carries you away, and sometimes you forget that you need to come back and understand what the metaphors are telling you and how they are sometimes running counter to what the sentence seems to be saying. You know, you have to come back and see how complexly this whole world is presented to us, you see. And that happens through the images, that happens through the metaphors used, and that happens through what I was describing as a wonderful world of objects, you see. Please, as an experiment, this I am addressing to the students, even in that wonderful translation, you feel that these things speak to us, these objects speak to us, these man-created things, they speak to us, whether it is a poster or whether it is the old locked cupboard which has locked inside even the future dowry for the unmarried daughter. All things are packed there. These are the ways in which Jayanth wants us to understand mainly the dynamism which is constantly changing both the worlds. Therefore, I consider him as a cultural historian of change, not of the ossified or the museumized local society, but of something that is constantly changing. There is a dynamism which brings about these changes. He does not use the word globalization, but that's exactly what is happening there. Let me give some instances now that I have been speaking more or less academically about this. Let's look at some of the examples here. In one wonderful story in his latest collection, Anarkali's safety pin. What happens is there are a couple married recently and a friend. They have decided that on that particular day they will visit a music maestro who is going to perform on the piano. They go there, and as soon as they enter the top floor, earlier dedicated only to the performance of music, the maestro is in great anxiety and is a very troubled person when they meet him. And he says that the owner of that building, that flat, has decided that it should be vacated immediately, and part of this project of vacating, emptying, he has threatened to lift that piano and throw it down. You understand the point I am trying to make here? In some such small corner, there is this maestro who knows this music so well, and the three of them are hoping that with that wonderful experience of listening to it, some change is going to occur. They're looking forward to it. And what's the reality? The reality is that real estate, widening of roads, or to use a metaphor that Jayanth uses, the poisonous morsel of progress thrust into your mouth. Now, this is something that is threatening the piano, threatening the music, and threatening the musical instruments also. That's how these are the changes that we see. And look at the young men that you find here in the story translated as interval. Um, one is a torch boy in a film theater, and he considers it a very important job because after the show is over, he goes around with his torch and then collects whatever has been either left back or missed. And then he has come from Vidarbha, and he is planning that someday, if he can't become Amitabh Bachchan who shines in the poster, he could become somebody. And there is the girl with whom he wants to elope. We don't know much about her. But of course, if you are reading the Jayanth, you should read the details. She has left behind her purse, and she asks him to find it out for her if nobody else has taken it. And he finds it and he opens it, and you should read the description, what is there in the purse. A few currency notes, 1 or 2 hair clips, and such things. See? You don't have to beat a drum and say, look at the poor girl. The things tell you. And her, the way she lives is also described. They decide that on one fine morning they will meet and they will run away. They go to the railway station, they buy 2 tickets, and then something very fantastic happens. You see. The boy gives 1 ticket to her, rushes away, and gets into another train. She doesn't seem to bother much about it. She waits for a minute, goes to a restaurant, feeds herself, and decides to walk the other way. Interval. In the sense, look, I am talking about this, which may appear very ordinary and trivial, but I think what Jayanth wants us to do is to focus on the choices of these two. See? They are described as having fallen in love with just a few exchanges through the eyes and a bit of lovely nonsense. They have talked to each other. That's all. But the choices made at the critical moment are that this can be one step towards your autonomy, your independence. It's not that you are going to hang on to the other person. How does this happen? How do these two, portrayed in the first part of the story as heading towards nothing but this elopement, and then maybe whatever disaster the elopement may bring. And what the story tells us is at that very critical moment, both of them use this first step to elopement for their autonomy, for their independence. This is constantly happening. There's another wonderful story where the loving but highly irresponsible father has named the baby girl as Mogri. Mogra is jasmine, sweet smelling jasmine. And poor Mogri, she goes through a very traumatic experience. Sorry, not even very traumatic, something she doesn't first understand, that she has been sexually violated. But in the act of that assault, she also learns that her sexuality, the young man had deceived her by saying, we are going on a treasure hunt, Gupta Nidhi, hidden treasure, and he takes her to the room where she is sexually assaulted. What does the story say at this point? It's not like a goldsmith saying when a lovely woman stoops to folly, etc. Here is Mogri, the new image that we have in the midst of this experience. She says, I have now discovered the treasure that I have. The little treasure is my sexuality. And that will give me independence. That will tell me how to deal with the males. These, I think, are, it's not that she is going to prostitute herself. She has just learned that a certain kind of power also goes with your own sexuality. And not just that, the other powerful image that comes with it is she begins to see all human beings as hingalu pranigalu, in the sense beasts or animals with twisted feet. Everybody is that. That's what she begins to understand. That does not prevent her from doing a small act of understanding and kindness to her father, who has, again to use his ironical word, balanced 3 families and 3 wives. I hope I have been able to take you to the story. Look at the number of things which are happening here. You have the booming real estate, and that creates a new class of young men who have inherited wealth from very dubious looking fathers, and now they are investing it in sexual exploitation. And in the midst of this, you don't have a young girl who is going to kill herself or jump from the window. You have somebody who says, I have also discovered my power. Now, these I think are the important things that one need to look into. And these are what I mentioned as the markers of the dynamism. Positive or negative doesn't matter, but things are changing. Things are changing in certain ways we have not been able to understand it. Therefore, the fiction of Jayanth is woven together with very new, sometimes shocking ideas about sexuality, about relationships. That's why I called it a counter world. This is a world which questions the world we have very proudly believed in. Every important thing that happens in this show it questions this. I mentioned Mowgli, but there are so many such instances where the conventional morality, all its problems, they're all, in a very subtle way, they're all unveiled, they're all unmasked. That I think is what we need to look at. Then also the changes which are occurring in the social structure. And this again enters his stories through the metaphors and the images, starting with the opening of the gold spot to other things which happen much later. That's why I say he's a cultural historian, a very materialist kind of a historian in the right sense, where he packs these materials and tells us, look, this is how the world is. That I think is important for us. The achievement of Jayanth has been to create this invisibilized world. It's not that it is really invisible, but we believe it is invisible, and we don't see it as a part of Mumbai. Even in our childhood, all of us who belong to North Karnataka and Uttar Kannada here, we have been captivated by the image of Bombay, mainly because some of our uncles had also migrated. And I, as a child, would think that my uncle, my mother's brother, who had migrated to Bombay, was probably owner of a bank. Then I discovered that he joined as an ad hoc clerk in the bank. But anyway, this is the Maya Nagari image we all had. Why do I call it visible and invisible? Because this is, again to use Jayanth's metaphor, something that these people, the workers, which also includes pimps and prostitutes, small-time thieves, all of them have built this Mumbai brick by brick, he says. They have built it brick by brick. These are the ones who have created this Mumbai, but we do not want to see that Mumbai. We do not want to see that Mumbai. We have our other image of the cosmopolis. We do not want to look at this real cosmopolis. And that, I think, happens in his in his fictions again and again. Then of course I already mentioned how porous these boundaries have now become, between the two worlds, Gokarna and then Mumbai. Either the boundaries are threatened or they are already porous. You don't know where they exist. That I think is again repeatedly pointed out in his short fiction. The other 2 points, Vardesh, please stop me when it is time. If it's already time, don't bother. I'll conclude. Okay. The important question here is, all right, Jayanth has done all this, his stories have done all this. Is that all? Is that all? Do the stories stop there? This question has been asked mainly because of the extraordinary inconclusiveness of his most of his stories. I'm not using it negatively at all. See. Many of his stories hint at a possible change, and the change begins here. Hint at a change and stop there. For example, in at least